Hi, this is Matt Nelson, president of CGC, and I'm here today to talk about comic book brand emblems. What is a comic book brand emblem? It's no different than an emblem used by many other brands we're familiar with, such as McDonald's Golden Arches and Nike's Swoosh. Brand emblems began shortly after comics started publishing in the 30s and were particularly important during the 40s when there was a flood of comics on the newsstands during World War II and beyond. Brand emblems continued on comic books actually to present day and have changed over time as well. Brand emblems are shown on the front cover of a comic book, and here I have a few examples, starting with Harvey, a Green Hornet, and the emblem there is below the title. And then we have Dell, a very popular one, and another one that we're all familiar with, Gold Key. And then a later example, Valiant, the Valiant Star. I have a few more examples of comic book brand emblems here. The first one is Fawcett from 1940. And here we have the familiar Fawcett triangle brand emblem with the 10 cents inside. And shortly thereafter, Quality jumped on board with their brand emblem, which is featured here on the side in a small bullet. And here is a 4-color number 11, which features the first Dell emblem, and this is earlier than the one that we're familiar with. This one is actually interesting because it features the picture of a horse inside of it. And another example of a modern brand emblem, this is Image, of course, and which is featured as an I, a lowercase I. One of the most well-known brand emblems among comic book collectors is the DC Bullet. This started in 1940, and I have here an early example of that bullet on Superman 13, which is featured here in the upper right-hand corner. This is Superman publication. Now, also during this time, DC's sister company, All American, had their own bullet, which is featured here on the Sensation cover. Now, eventually, DC and All American merged by the late 40s, and after that point, the DC Bullet continued throughout the 50s and 60s. And I have an example here. This is kind of a unique one from the 50s. You have the double bullet for DC. It didn't continue very long. Eventually, it was replaced with a single bullet that continued on through the 60s. Another interesting brand emblem is for Timely and Marvel. So as a lot of collectors know, Marvel Comics that we know and love today actually started as Timely Comics in the 40s. For a brief period of time in the late 40s, they were called Marvel, and then changed to Atlas during the 50s, and then back to Marvel in the 60s to present. So I've got a few examples of brand emblems here. This is a very cool one. This is the very first Atlas globe that was featured on a Timely or Marvel comic book in the 40s. And it's a very pretty globe here. And but shortly thereafter, it actually changed to a Marvel comic. So this is the first emblem that actually features the word Marvel comic on it, shortly after the globe appeared. And a couple of years after that, we actually have an example here of a Marvel comic bullet, not unlike the bullet brand emblems of the other publishers. And again, this is a period in the late 40s when the company was going by Marvel. And then shortly thereafter, in 1951, we see the very first Atlas globe, the traditional globe that collectors are very familiar with from the 50s. And this ran on all the Atlas comics throughout that decade until the 1957, at which point it was phased out. And finally, by the 1960s, we've got the familiar Marvel brand emblem up here, the square box in the upper left-hand corner featuring the character's head. And this went through a few changes during the 60s, but this is the brand emblem that Marvel collectors are very familiar with during that time period. CGC has partnered with Matt Bruback, a collector who helped determine the first appearances of these comic book brand emblems. Using the Library of Congress registration date, CGC has ranked these brand emblems in order of appearance throughout the decades. CGC recognizes the first brand emblems on their label in the art and key comments in the upper right. This particular issue that features the first Atlas globe lists not only the first globe appearance, but also the first time that an emblem appears on any issue of a particular publication. CGC has identified the first appearance of more than 40 different brand emblems, but there's more work to be done. In the meantime, we've released a list of those that we do recognize on the label. Submit your comics today at cgccomics.com and follow us on social media at CGC Comics.